here. Cheetahburg Forest. If this is going to load in fine. Yeah, well, so very interesting map layout. It's pretty much always the same. And we got Reno here in the blue trunks. On the north, hasn't actually got those scouts working yet. He's going to change it up and go for the wood to start with because he's thinking, oh, maybe I'll go for that early barrack. Oh, actually no, he's gone for a storehouse there, so it's a bit of a worry really because he's only got about 300 wood to chop through there. And you know, realistically, if he put this storehouse up here, he'd get that same benefit. He wouldn't be wasting, well, in the long run, he's going to be wasting 50 wood out of this because he's going to want to put a storehouse here. Eventually going to want to put a storehouse probably out here so he gets both from the gold and the wood. So we've got Reno here in the blue trunks. Seesaw here in the red. He's on the Greeks. I do much prefer his storehouse placement, but even still, if he had to put this storehouse possibly here, be a little bit better in the long run for the deer. There's a little bit less walk time to these ones further away. Although this isn't a bad spot if he wants to take the boar, if he wants to bring the scout to tank the boar over here, have the town centre attack it as well, and the villagers can help finish it off even quicker, save a bit of scout health. So I think this storehouse actually could be fairly reasonable, because yeah, those boar are quite close. It's a map where you often do get an early boar to try and, you know, leash towards your town centre. Reno unfortunately doesn't seem to have one just here. He might have one a little bit further up, or hidden away in this pocket. He's got some more over here he can go for, but Seesaw's actually taking out some wolves for him. So the thing with Cheetahburg is it really rewards early game map control, because as you can see, players have actually got to chop through these wood lines to get access to, there's often a gold mine, probably going to be one there, a hunt and a stone in all these little pockets. So, and Seesaw's going to be chopping for ages to try and get through there. Weirdly enough, it might be worth actually running a scout alongside the back forest line so you can actually get to see where the thinnest bit is and try and focus on chopping through there, just so you get access to that early, a little bit early access, sorry, to these mining nodes and possibly a hunt, just in case your opponent can actually hem you in, because realistically you've only got to try and lock down this choke and your opponent has nowhere to go, can't access these, you know, highly valuable sides of the map. Like we got 2 hunts, 2 golds, 2 stones, berries over here. This side will be pretty similar. There'll probably be 2 or 3 hunts and some other resources, berries, golds, stones. So if you can force your opponent back to this top quarter or bottom quarter of the map, they are really forced to focus on wood they might not actually need in order to break through and get access to other resources. And try and set up for a market line as well, because you can go for a market here, put your town centre right up in the corner over here, and you've got a reasonable market line, but otherwise, you know, you're sort of stuck with a crappy one from here to here, for instance. So you really want to use your wood gathering to help pave the way for a strong mid to late game. So we've got Seesaw going for some early spears here. I think you should probably look at pushing now, because he can start to punish Reno. Reno's gone to age 2. He's getting some stone so he can get a town centre or some towers. He's going to want to keep up the wood gathering though, because he doesn't want to be floating stone while he's waiting for the wood. And the wood's honestly going to be a more important resource, because it's going to mean he's got access to, you know, barracks, stables, that sort of thing, to be able to produce some units here. Storehouse, perhaps a tad greedy. If he has it back here, it's going to be much harder for Seesaw to engage here. Reno's actually going to pull everything. Not sure if this is really the way to go. He's going to have to try and get a lot of wood quite quickly here so he can produce a barracks. At the same time, while being in this forward position, he's sort of risking it all. He's going to have to try and take fights with several workers at once just to keep one alive for Seesaw back, but it's going to cost him a lot of gathering time here. He's really got to try and... He should honestly probably even just cancel that storehouse, or let Seesaw focus on that while he's, you know, gathering the back line here. In fact, the storehouse right on his gold mine would be ideal. Again, he's able to gather both resources. It's hella protected from the town center. So these spears are going to have to try and wrap around in line of sight of it. So this has been really worthwhile for Seesaw because it's locked up Reno a lot here. He's not even producing villages. He's going to go for a range, but bearing in mind Norse doesn't have access to early bowmen. They've got skirmishers instead, so I think he's probably best off going for the barracks for throwing axemen here. Seesaw, this has been a nice early game for him. He's overgathering a little bit on the gold and the food, but so far it's not really mattering. It's going to mean he can keep producing spears and hyparspists. He's getting his H2 now, a little bit slower than Reno, but Reno's 17 villages. Seesaw's up to 21. So right now, he's in a nice spot because a lot of low villages here for Reno, and he's not actually again, he's trying to get a lot of stone here, and actually, he's not depositing resources before he switches over to the next resource pile, which is what you really want to try and do. And on top of that, with whatever villages are going to be most exposed here to the spears, he wants to keep the low ones away from the spearmen. Have all your high health villages over here on the stone, have all your low health villages tucked away at the back here on a rear storehouse, and that way you're going to minimize the amount of villager damage you actually take. Force your opponent to have to overcommit with the spearmen in order to actually get any value, and hope he sort of has to back out midway and gets basically nothing out of it. So Reno is going to start making some skirmishes, but he's also housed at the moment. He needs to get a long house at the moment. Seesaw right now is in a reasonable spot. He's overcommitted to houses a little, because I mean realistically he wants to be 31 of 35 or 31 of 40 at this point. He doesn't necessarily need one or two of these houses until he's actually produced a little bit more in the way of infantry, or he's just gone for the second town center, which seems to be what he's doing. And just make sure he doesn't overgather on the stone here, because he still needs to get 270 wood. So yeah, it looks like he's got a little bit of extra stone, but it's nothing major. In the meanwhile, he's really forcing Reno to have to come to him, putting a bit of pressure on. He's not going to really deny Reno any early resources here, but eventually Reno's going to want to gather out this gold mine and go for the next one. This storehouse, it's in a good spot overall because he's only going to cut through a few trees to get to the deer and the other gold mine and stone mine back here. A really defensive second town center. He needs to produce more villages though. He wants to maintain constant villager production no matter what. So even if it's going to delay this town center slightly getting the longhouse, it's definitely worth it just to maintain that villager production and maintain any military production you might be going for. Because realistically, if you've got a military production building out, even with the reduced gather rate, you should be producing military almost non-stop out of all the military production buildings you've got. And if that's going to bleed you dry, realistically, you probably shouldn't have gone for that many production buildings. That way, you'd have the wood to have town centers and have more villager uptime on the food to actually maintain double village production. Because ultimately, getting to between 60 and 120 villages should be your imperative. Just so you actually got an economy to be able to spend on military production and take fights. Just make sure you're never going to be seriously outgunned. So Seesaw, second town center here. Reno, second town center. Reno's a lot more defensive, so in the long run it's going to be harder for him to control resources, but in the short term it also means Reno can't really be shoved into, and Seesaw's going to make sure he's just got enough military to make sure that Reno doesn't push into him. So he's gone for, we've got Sari and Spears up against skirmishers, so this is not normally how you see this matchup played out in the higher tiers, because typically the Norse will try and spam as many throwing axemen as they can, force the Greek to really overcommit to Toxotes, and then just try and flood with a bunch of raiders. You don't often see skirmishes get made. In fact, players of any civ will generally opt away from bowmen or counter-ranged H2 play if possible, because you've really got to commit a lot of early to mid-game wood on your buildings, so it just is a little bit easier to have a food gold centric army. So Reno's going for a barracks here, and the beauty of the throwing axemen is they not only counter infantry, they've actually got a reasonable amount of stats to deal with ranged units. So will ultimately lose against Toxotes, but they won't lose as hard to Toxotes as pretty much any other counter infantry would, other than maybe Legionary, because Legionary, they've got that innate ranged armor and a good health pool for a counter infantry unit. So Seesaw's just going to make sure his opponent can't touch that gold mine and is forced to cut all the way through here for a late game gold income. Bearing in mind Reno's already starting to bank a bit of gold, he's still got 2.5k there to gather. So he could actually really boom up to, you know, 100, 120 military, no problem at the moment. Especially considering throwing axemen, they cost more other resources than they do gold. Skirmishes as well, very cheap on the gold. So it's really only if the Norse player is having to make spears and raiders in this position that they'd be sweating about their long-term gold here. Seesaw's going to set up a couple of towers, hope to really contain his opponent. Oftentimes, Norse play this sort of style into the other civs because the Norse got access to that military building. You don't have to worry about forward villages here and having to try and keep them alive, having to try and garrison into your, your first tower that goes up. So I think Reno is going to have to get some spears or some raiders just because they're going to want to have a mix of melee and range to try and take down these towers as fast as possible and also minimize the damage that they do. Skirmishes with a tiny health pool compared to the infantry or the cavalry of the Norse. Seesaw's eco, 51 villages to Reno's 30. It seems like he's playing a much stronger early game eco here. He's even going to try and really choke in Reno here, going for some wall, so if he just puts them a little bit more around the front of the tower, it makes it actually really difficult to try and take them down with melee, and then you've got to rely on a hella high throwing axeman count to break this. And by then, Seesaw will be able to go for age 3 or get a bunch of his own Toxotes and Hypaspists, so Reno just needs to make sure he's maintaining double production here of the villages. Seesaw's doing a pretty good job of it. In fact, he's slightly overkilling, but that's definitely preferable to not producing them at all. So, I mean, if he wants, he could actually cancel a couple of villages here, cancel one here, spend a bit more on army at this stage. Although, bearing in mind, his gold income's sort of dragging the chain for him at the moment. He's overbanking a little bit of food, 26 food gatherers to 6 gold gatherers, and he's actually already banked up a bit more food than he has gold. So this economy otherwise looks to be in great shape. 59 villages to his opponent's 34. So Reno gonna go for age 3, but I think he might be a tad early here. He needs to get more villages out, get a little bit more of a force going, and in fact possibly test the waters and try and possibly not break this, but at least delay, say, the walls going up, or have prevented that second tower, because the longer this goes on, the more Seesaw's going to be entrenched here. I mean, a forward armory, not something you often see, because if you lose the armory mid-upgrade, it's a big blow time-wise. You've got to invest in building the armory. You've got to invest in getting the upgrades all over again. Not cost-wise, but just time-wise. So Seesaw's going for a bit of a push here to try and attack this wood line. He's been too successful with it, though, because with the double town centre fire and the throwing axemen mostly copying the brunt of the Sari damage as well as the spears damage, they're equipped to really deal with both. So the Sari's not really going to be able to hit their counter unit in the skirmishes, which is the ideal world for Seesaw there. So Reno's going for a really turtley sort of style here. In fact, he could use his military to build this while his villagers just keep gathering. Even throw down, say, a stables or another barracks here. But the fortress is going to be able to eventually whittle down both of these towers. So a lot more health, does a little bit more damage. Seesaw's going to have good vision of his opponent for the time being, but Reno has got access to whatever resources are back here. I think there'll be another gold mine. I assume this off-coloured patch was one, but it might be another one over here, or tucked away in the corner over here. Seesaw, very interesting wall setup, just in case Reno chops through here. Reno might be looking to try and cut through this side because Seesaw hasn't decided to wall it off, and there's a lot of resources there to go for. The fortress is going to break through this hold pretty soon, but Seesaw, 70 villages, still double producing. And with H3 he can go for a triple town center if he wants. Reno's going to have access to Fabiota, so these guys are going to be able to make short work of these towers. A reasonable number of military, still producing infantry as well, which is nice. We want to see that. Probably wants to get these villages on wood, as well as start going for farm economy, or get on top of this hunt over here, because he needs to maintain some good food income here. Yeah, he could afford a pair of farms and go for a storehouse over here. That'd really set him up to start pushing out, start getting a bit more map control here. Seesaw's doing a lot of forward building, and in the short term this means he can mass up a lot of units right on his opponent's doorstep, but now the towers are gone, and Reno's got a couple of these Fabiota. He should be able to eventually break this, I think, and Seesaw might have to look at playing defensively. He's got a good number of military buildings back over his actual side of the map, so, you know, it's going to come down to how well he can take these next couple of fights. Reno's got a reasonable amount of resources in the bank. He's just not producing enough units, and he needs to get his villagers back to work here, so he needs to throw up a longhouse or two, or maybe go for that third town center. He's going to start on farm eco, but he really needs to get these guys, you know, on the wood gathering or onto that hunt there, because then he can start to really spend up here, still have a little bit in the bank. You know, add another production facility or two and just keep spamming units at the moment. He wants to get up to that, you know, 160 population, because ideally you want to be as maxed out population wise sort of as quickly as you can, even if it's off an age 2 composition over an age 3 one, just because it means that your opponent's forced to have to actually play defensively behind it, getting a fast age 3 and fortresses on the town centers, or staying in age 2 and just towering up all over their base. Otherwise, you can basically just push to win. But these guys are doing a good job considering this is their first show match. I think Reno really needs to up his production here. He is going to go for the third town center. He desperately needs to get another pair of longhouses and another military building. He's got a big gold bank, so he could honestly cut gold gathering for the moment. Just rely on new villages being built to go on the gold, while he, you know, gathers as much wood and food as possible and just spams out enough units to break this containment. He actually should be okay to control this gold mine here, provided he can keep this fortress alive. Seesaw does have other ideas. He wants to go for some rams or some ballista here. He's nearly got the resources to go to age 4. Though a bit too much stone in the bank, perhaps, unless he really wants to commit to fortresses here, because he could, you know, spend a bit of stone on age 4 upgrades and make sure he's got 800-ish left, so he can go for that golden age. We get 91 villages and 69 military kek, so it's a really nice spot for him to be in. He's basically maxed out for age 2 with that third town center coming up, so that'll be age 3 maxed out basically. Reno's trying to go for this market over here, but that's never going to work. It's walled off, so with trees, so he's best off putting it over in this bottom corner. And it might not be the best market line now, but when he does go to age 4, he can always go for a town center up here. Get a little bit more resources out of it, but it's a big army here for Seesaw. Reno handicapped himself by not getting the longhouses out, and not using military to build buildings, and just trying to spend up as much as possible. I mean, these guys are both pretty new players. Seesaw perhaps a little bit more experienced. I think he's got a good background of AoE 2 gameplay, I think. So he's creeping forward with everything he's got. I don't think he's got enough to break through the town centers unless he sends another ram or two. If Reno's able to snipe them with his villagers with garrisons, but he's not really going to try and go for that. He's just trying to run for his life and set up some military buildings, but it may be too little too late here. Fortunately for our Norse friend in the blue, with the red Greek player with a really nice age 3 max and push. A bit of an advantage with his map control early and just forcing his opponent to panic. And Seesaw, this is quite nice for him, even if Reno is able to produce a bunch of units. He's a little bit slow on the military production here. So his town centers are burning at the moment. He's got them starting to be able to replace 2 town centers though. So if he can evacuate these villages up to this top side here and force them out as quickly as possible, and he's left it a little bit too late. Thank you for the follow. Yeah, poor old Reno. I think this may be it. I'm not sure if he even knows he can just surrender at this point. Or maybe he's worried if he surrenders it'll disqualify him or something. But yeah, I think we might call that a GG there. Seesaw victorious. Reno, fortunately, for Reno, he's down for the count. So we might cut that one there, eh? So well played to our players, particularly Seesaw. I didn't expect him to be that strong, but a really solid Greek age 2 and 3 for him. Reno, just a couple of things he could fix with his openings. Oh, thank you for the raid, T-West. Thank you all for tuning in. So we've just had Reno versus Seesaw, one of our newer contenders matchups. Erie does still play on and off. He plays in the tournaments. At the moment, I think he's taking a bit of a break between the events, but on the 26th or 27th, we're going to have the summer event, and we'll probably try and arrange a tournament not long after. So I think he'll probably be back for that, because I think this is his favourite game in the series. But yeah, cheers all for tuning in, guys. We've got Tim versus Wade up next, and this will be a best of 3 series.